world keeps evolving. The times keep changing. The new generation of technology. The new generation of information. They bring the future before us. Institut Teknologi 10 November, a place where the spirit of heroism underlies the new generation to research and innovate in technology. The University of Heroes, ITS. ITS is one of the best science and technology universities in Indonesia, which was founded by Dr. Angga in 1957. In every step, ITS focuses in advancing education, research, management, and community service. As an incorporated public university, ITS has been able to manage autonomously the policy of academics, organizations, finance, students' affairs, human resources, facilities, operational, and infrastructure.
In the spirit of Indonesian heroes, during the battle in the 10th of November 1945, ITS always makes efforts to be the best in education, research, and community services, especially in the fields of industry and maritime. ITS also actively contributes to the nation development, and in the future, ITS will become an entrepreneurial university with world-class reputation.
ITS has many achievements. Both national and international achievements prove that ITS keeps growing and gives the best contribution to the nation of Indonesia. ITS is a place for new hopes to grow. An ideal environment for the new generation to flourish in 3 strategic locations within the industrial city of Surabaya. As a smart eco-campus, ITS maintains harmony between technological advances and the sustainability of the surrounding ecosystem. ITS has 7 faculties with prospective scientific fields, including Scientics, INSIS, Vocation, Creatis, MarTech, Electrics, Plan. ITS is a space for the new generation who are hungry for knowledge because it provides a wide range of references in both physical and digital form. ITS makes it easier for the new generation to access information by providing flexible classes. ITS keeps moving forward in facing future challenges by providing the best facilities for the new generation's activities. The facilities support both spiritual and physical needs. ITS also provides research facilities in the ITS Science Technopark, including ICT and robotics, automotive, maritime, and creative industries. Therefore, the excellent generations from ITS will emerge and make history. ITS is a space for the new generation to express themselves. ITS is a place where the new generation learns new things and finds their purpose. ITS has become a place where the new generations that carry the future will be born.
ITS is a campus of science and technology, which focuses on the research and innovation, presenting technology for prosperity.
With a spirit of heroism, ITS brings the future before us. ITS, the University of Heroes. The world keeps evolving. The times keep changing. The new generation of technology. The new generation of information. They bring the future before us. Institut Teknologi 10 November, a place where the spirit of heroism underlies the new generation to research and innovate in technology. The University of Heroes, ITS. ITS is one of the best science and technology universities in Indonesia, which was founded by Dr. Angga in 1957. In every step, ITS focuses in advancing education, research, management, and community service. As an incorporated public university, ITS has been able to manage autonomously the policy of academics, organizations, finance, students' affairs, human resources, facilities, operational, and infrastructure.
In the spirit of Indonesian heroes, during the battle in the 10th of November 1945, ITS always makes efforts to be the best in education, research, and community services, especially in the fields of industry and maritime. ITS also actively contributes to the nation development, and in the future, ITS will become an entrepreneurial university with world-class reputation.
ITS has many achievements. Both national and international achievements prove that ITS keeps growing and gives the best contribution to the nation of Indonesia. ITS is a place for new hopes to grow. An ideal environment for the new generation to flourish in 3 strategic locations within the industrial city of Surabaya. As As a smart eco-campus, ITS maintains harmony between technological advances and the sustainability of the surrounding ecosystem. ITS has 7 faculties with prospective scientific fields, including Scientics, INSYS, Vocation, Creatis, MarTech, Electics, SIFPlan. ITS is a space for the new generation who are hungry for knowledge because it provides a wide range of references in both physical and digital form. ITS makes it easier for the new generation to access information by providing flexible classes. ITS keeps moving forward in facing future challenges by providing the best facilities for the new generation's activities. The facilities support both spiritual and physical needs. ITS also provides research facilities in the ITS Science Technopark, including ICT and robotics, automotive, maritime, and creative industries. Therefore, the excellent generations from ITS will emerge and make history. ITS is a space.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, before we start commence the program, and here are the following webinar protocol. For each participant ID, please use your real name following with your origin of institution. All of participants are expected to mute the audio and only unmute the video during the event. We cordially invite you to take your own firm and comfort seat in your own room, and please avoid the backlight. Make sure that you have a good and stable internet connection. If you have an earphone or headset, we recommend you to use it so that your voice can clearly and loudly to be heard. During the Q&A discussion session, all participants, please use the chat box to deliver the questions. Thank you for your cooperation and consideration.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the guest lecture series on SDGs today, Wednesday, 2 June 2021. My name is Samara from ITS Global Engagement and will be your master of ceremony this afternoon. Thank you for joining our guest lecture series on SDGs today. Before we start our agenda, let me inform you of some rules for the event. To all participants, please fill your attendance at bit.ly/attendance_GLS SDGs. Our committee will also send the attendance link in the Zoom chat room. For participants who wish to get an e-certificate and stamp for it, please fill the attendance 15 minutes after the session starts. Second, participants who wish to ask questions during the question and answer session, please send your question to intip.in/Q&A/GLS-SDGs. The link for questions will be listed in the Zoom chat room as well. Or you can ask directly by clicking the raise hand feature. Ladies and gentlemen, today's guest lecture series topic is flood resilient approaches for sustaining water-based architecture and cultural heritage, and planning approaches for disaster mitigation and resilience. That will be delivered by our speakers, Dr. Widya Pitunangpu from Naresuan University and Dr. Prananda Navitas MSc from Institut Teknologi 10 November or ITS. This lecture will be moderated by Ibu Iska Desmawati MSc from Institut Teknologi 10 November. Before we start our agenda, allow me to deliver our schedule today as follows. First is the opening, second is the introduction to moderator and speakers, and then will be followed by the lecture session and Q&A session. And then we will proceed with the certificate awarding, and last but not least is the closing. Before we proceed to the next agenda, let me introduce our moderator today. Our moderator today is Ibu Iska Desmawati MSc from ITS. She received her master and bachelor degree from Biology Department, Master of Science from Biology Department Erlangga University, and Bachelor of Science from Biology Department Institut Teknologi 10 November. She has several professional experiences, such as the lecturer in Biology Department in ITS since 2014, and also other experiences such as surveyor and researcher in Dinas Lingkungan Hidup, Surabaya from 2011 to 2012, and laboratory assistant and teaching assistant since 2008 until 2011. Her expertise is in ecology, avifauna, biogeography, and product innovation for conservation. Now, without further ado, let us proceed to the main agenda. To Ibu Iska, the time is yours.
Thank you so much for the MC, Mbak Marisha, and it will be my honor to be the moderator for this session, for this special session. And also we have two special guests today. That will be Professor Widya and also Dr. Prananda. So for the first lecture will be delivered by Professor Widya Pitunangpu from the Naresuan University. Hello, Professor.
Hello, hi.
Hi, great to see you.
Yes, thank you.
So this is the CV from the Professor Widya Pitunangpu. And from here, we can see that from the educational background, Prof. Widya get the PhD from the Town and Regional Planning from the University of Sheffield, and then got the Master of Science from the Urban Environmental Management and from ASEAN Institute of Technology, Thailand, and also got from the Bachelor Architecture from the Architecture Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. And Professor Widya also have a lot of awards and research fellowship. The first will be Teaching Role Model in 2020 from the Naresuan University, and also have a Thai Award in 2050 as a Good Person Merit Making for Thailand in Academic Surveys, awarded by Thai Award Organization, and also got the Thailand Thorai Science Foundation and Erasmus Mobility in Action of Students and Professor Macro Polo Project. And for the professional experiences, from the 2016 until current, Professor also have assistant professor in Faculty of Architecture, Naresuan University. And in the 20 until 2060, Professor Widya also lecture in the Faculty of Architecture in the Naresuan University. And from the 2019 until present, will be co-focal point of Sukhothai UCICN. Okay, from the next agenda, maybe Professor Vidya can open from the lecture. Now the time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Iska.
Yes.
Let me share my slides.
Yes, Professor.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Yes, can you see it properly and hear me properly, right?
Yes, it is great.
Yes, I have to say good afternoon for everyone, or selamat sore for all Indonesian staff and students. I'm so pleased to join the ITS Global Engagement, especially for the guest lecture series. And also thank you so much for your impressive and wonderful video of the campus orientation. Today, as the MC, Ms. Pananda introduced, I'm come from Faculty of Architecture, Art and Design. It's has been the new name of our, previously we are Faculty of Architecture, but right now we are Faculty of Architecture, Art and Design from Naresuan University, which is located in the lower northern region of Thailand. And I'm the Deputy Dean for Academic and Research Affairs. It's nice to meet you all today and welcome to my presentation. Today I will discuss and present my lesson learned with you about climate change, global challenge from the impact of climate change and how it's connected with the cultural heritage as my concerns. And also with my current research. Actually, I done some research with the Newton Fund with over the half decade. We try to make a connection between the climate change policy with the cultural heritage in that sense. And I will share with your with the good practice of local wisdom of living with water as its maybe alternative of how to live with it in resilience approach from the case study in Thailand, particular from the from my place, Pistonolo province, with it in the lower northern region of Thailand. And also the key message for today will be our future challenge to discuss with you. And if you have any question, then I'm so willing to respond at the QA session. All right. As we know, the climate change affected all aspects of our way of living, not only environmental impacts, in terms of environmental degradation, in terms of economic decline, in terms of the property loss, in terms of health issue, blah, 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 and also in terms of cultural impact. But not a lot of cities concerned about the impact in our cultural, cultural sector or cultural heritage sector. Then I will talk about this with you. Before we moving in detail in terms of the impacts and how it's associated with the climate heritage. You will see the cultural heritage have like two main aspects, tangible and intangible. In terms of movable of the physical elements or the immovable elements of our heritage. And also in terms of intangible, the local wisdom, the way of living, this kind of thing will be, some of them accepted as the universal values, outstanding universal value, but some of them it just belong to the indigenous knowledge or local wisdom. And we recognize that cultural aspect is one of the important dimension of sustainability as well. But most of the time, it's kind of like a missing pillar because most of the policy, they mainly concentrate in three dimensions, social, economics, or environmental dimension of sustainable development. But in terms of our ASEAN or Southeast Asia, it's great to discuss about that with Indonesian from Thailand aspect as well, to see how the climate change in Thailand. I might say we might lucky because flooding seemed to be only the main disaster in Thailand. In the past, Thai people learned how to live with water from generation to generation. We don't see the flood as disaster. We learn how to live in harmony with it. But right now, because of the impact of rapid urbanization, because of the expansion of the city, of the land use change, even the urban sprawls, makes flooding become more unpredictable, particularly the climate change. As we experience now, climate change affects everything, not only people, affect place, affect even the pandemics that we are facing so far. And you will see how the agricultural sector affected, how it link with the tourism. And I can say we have a big GDP generate from cultural-based tourism. I think Indonesia as well, and many cities in Southeast Asia or in ASEAN, we have a lot of foreigner, the tourists to visit our heritage site. That's why when the heritage site affected by climate change, it will cause to a wide range of impacts, especially the people's livelihood. That is our concern. This photo you will show you how huge loss of the cultural heritage site that we try to survive. We try to protect our cultural heritage. So far, Thailand have 3 cultural heritage sites, one in the northeast, another one is in Sukhothai in the north, which is the nearest heritage site in my campus. And the photo here is in the central of Thailand, or Ayutthaya heritage site. Many people call Ayutthaya as the Venice of the East, because people, live along the river, and we use the river network, for traveling, for growing rice, for growing, for fishing, for crop making, or many things. But right now we struggle with the climate change, particularly in terms of flooding, because it's not only unpredictable, but it stays longer. Sometimes it stays 3 months, and community around them cannot, get the income generation from cultural tourism. This is the huge impact that we facing so far. And also the climate change master plan in Thailand, unluckily, I don't think in not only Thailand, but in many cities in our region, we don't have the integration between climate change and cultural heritage sectors. We try to working across organization we need to do to adapt, and to mitigate the impacts. But I just can't imagine how to push planning into more practice. This is one of the issues. Thailand climate change policy, we try to move forward by looking, backward and looking forward to achieve the SDG goals in as many cities do in 2030. And also, we try to make a beautiful plan, but in practice, we need to concern about how the locals adapt and apply the policy into their daily life as well. 17 sustainable development goals. What does it mean in our developing country sense? It's not only practice, but in terms of the budget, the implementation, the local engagement is very important. We cannot concern on the climate action in the goal number 13 without to think about the 11 goals in terms of sustainable city and communities. Then its aspect of sustainable development goals need to work across areas and needs cross-disciplinary collaboration to work on. It's not easy, it's so complicated and it's challenging. And also my current research with the kind of the global partnership scheme, we try to focus on the Sukhothai and Sri Sachinara historical parks in the north, which is just half an hour for driving from Naresuan University, because it's the location of logistic hub. And you may visit it sometime if the COVID-19 gone, absolutely. And also I work voluntarily to join the group of Climate Heritage Network, especially in working group 4, to try to move forward from policy into cultural heritage adaptation as well. And as you know that when we talk about this global challenge, yes, we think global, but in practice, we need to communicate, to act local for being resilient. It's very important to, I will talk forward, backward through my slides, because every slide connected to get you to think about how to compromise the old with the new. You will see so far the building style, the architecture characteristic, they look the same. They don't present how local identity to represent the location of the architecture. I will see on the right bottom, and also at the below bottom, right below, you will see this is the vernacular of steel house in Thailand, not only in the central, the north, the south, and in the northeast as well. People live along the river and the canal network, and it represents how we live with the water as they elevated the floor to let the flooding flow during the rainy season. And vernacular architecture adapt from generation to generation. You will see right now the sinking effect from the sea levels also makes vernacular and local wisdom is more complicated to deal with the current issue. That's why this photo shows you how people adapt their heritage to live with the climate change. This is one part of the city next to the coastal area, the seashore of Thailand. And this temple sink, lost, and people have to elevate that and try to build, the walkway to protect it, to connect the temple. So far, a huge area of the seashore was gone due to the rising sea level. And the question is what we're going to do with our heritage, how we can survive our heritage in that sense. This is to think about. And this is the flood impacts. I will talk about the flooding because, it's the main issue in Thailand, but also in many cities around the world facing unpredictable flood as well. And you will see the tangible direct loss in terms of the property, the damage to the house, even in the indirect loss in terms of the infrastructure, disruption to the service, or loss of life, or loss of livelihood, and broken down community as well. You will see how tangible and intangible of cultural loss in terms of natural environment, cultural landscape, architectural site, even the cultural content, the small elements of the cultural will also be damaged. And at the end will be lost value in our culture as well. This is another challenge. These photos show you one of the traditional settlement, which is located in the Yom River basin. You will remember the Yom River because I will show you the map. The Yom River basin is only one remain river in Thailand that don't have the dam construction or invention upstream. That means the river and people who live around the river still traditional settlement. But right now, many water-based communities move away from their village because not only flooding they face with during the rainy season, but also they face with drought. No water at all. It seems like water is not a problem for Thai people, but without water, we cannot fishing, we cannot growing foods, we cannot do cropping. And this is the sad story that I can show you. That's why we concern more about how to preserve the spirit of praise in the community living along the river. And we need to think about how to avoid, how to control, how to adapt to reduce the risks, to reduce the impact of the property damage. And it's why it's connected with, housing design as well. You will see how it's important for being resilient. Somehow the engineering approach maybe try to survive against the nature at the resistance approach. Or maybe we're lucky to repair, but some system, ecology system cannot repair, or how we can avoid, how we can compromise between that. You will see that got different respects to climate change impact, from the building domestic space, building scale, housing scale, neighborhood scale, city scale, or regional scale or planning. I wouldn't like to say town planning it doesn't work in many developing countries. As you know, maybe because of political influence, because we don't plan to control and to preserve, but we just manage the change. We cannot protect our green space somehow. But in Thailand, this is the good side because we have the planning revolution, and we gonna protect more green space. We try to make the room for the river. We try to preserve agricultural landscape because we learned from our failure in the big flood in 2011. That means the most effective way for design should be started from town planning and in that urban scale. But if it doesn't work, you will see it could be start from the size management. The top lines of the photos come from Vietnam, right? From near between Hanoi and Hoi An. With it, show how to, adapt the sandbags with the sponsor from the Japanese government to protect their seashore, because they lost every time Thailand have to. It's my joke because when I met my Vietnamese friend, I will always thanks to them. That thanks to the Vietnam to protect and buffer, the disaster, the typhoon, before it's reached to Thailand and attack Thailand. And the Vietnamese colleagues said, "Oh no, Vidya, you don't need to thank you to us. Vietnamese also have to thank you to the Filipinos, because it's just a joke that every country we help each other, as we are the same ecosystem." And you will see the Mosaic project in Venice. Even they use the high technology, they try to protect the Venice from storms or attack, but it doesn't work because many historic buildings surprise because I've been there, and during the flooding, water didn't come over from the shoreline, but water come from underground. Then every building affected because water is everywhere in Venice. That's for a mega project doesn't mean it will it will solve out the problems. And some photo, the top bottom from the UK in Morecambe, and also from Lancaster, sorry. And you will see how they adapt, how the Dutch protect, how the Dutch live with the water, and they can manage it with the high technology. And also, even in the UK, they're facing with the unpredictable, stay longer flood, and they lost a lot from the museum, the York Museum. From the photo, this is show how worst of the climate change impact to our world, even the flooding form another side of our planet as well. You will see, and also at the domestic scale or housing scale, we have a lot of alternative in terms of adaptation, building technology to protect even wet proof or dry proof from waterproof. Yeah, they got a lot of innovation to do that. Even the steel house, they try to let the water flow out with the aqua wrap, with the water resistant building materials. But the question is, how could the locals afford that? How could water-based community in Thailand apply the high technology, to adapt to their house? It's a question because somehow it's difficult and complicated to do that. That means we need to think about how to combine, local wisdom with affordable technology. This is the principle, one of the principle of, self-sufficiency of the King Ramana as well. Try to combine and integrate your local wisdom with affordable technology. This is the future resilience of our country as well. And also, you need to think about how to compromise between the engineering structure or gray structure, gray infrastructure with the green infrastructure, the non-structure measure to protect the community and our cultural heritage. And you will see the case study from the lower northern region of Thailand. Today, I will present only the Bangrakam case study, which is located in in my campus, Phitsanulok province. You will see this one. This is the location, the Kingdom of Thailand, and this is the Yom River that I mentioned to you. And they got many traditional settlements that live along the river without any dam intervention here. It's a challenge because not all of the outer river have the dam construction, to control water, to manage water. Somehow it doesn't work. Somehow it works. Somehow it's collapsed and make another disaster. Therefore, this case study will show you how people use their own cultural landscape elements to live with water in harmony way. Surprisingly, they don't see disaster is their disaster. Okay, this is the flooding. They see the flooding as natural phenomenon, nor disaster. I will show you how Bangrakam is the name of the fishing village, which is just 10 minutes away from Naresuan University. And we call it an amphibians village because people learn how to live with water in various ways. You will see from their house, their livelihood, their cultural landscape, their water-based skill, and also water-based architecture. You see this one, they elected their house from time to time. They repainting their house from time to time. They enjoy living with water. You will see the house. Some engineering, when they see this structure, they say, oh my God, it's not safely to live in this house because it might be the bending crack or it look very unsafely. And my colleagues from other health science or from the public health, they say, oh no, you cannot live with water. Oh, it's very unhygienic. It's very dangerous. And, people, the community complain that, oh, Vitya, why people from different faculties from your university have different approach and different opinions based on our community. I think only faculty of architecture think about the values of our way of living, because sometimes community is so confused. They don't know. Many people seem this is improper to live, but it's way of living because they live it for 100 years ago, 200 years ago. They adapt and adopt their domestic space from generation to generation. But unluckily, they don't recognize this as the cultural heritage. It's too local, it's too indigenous, it's too, it's another gap of our, appreciation of cultural heritage. then it's very important for us to, enhance the community, empower them to concern on their living, because otherwise people just move away and it will become, the derelict village, no way of living, no life at all. And you see how they adapt their domestic space at the mezzanines there. When the flood, when I say about the Yom River, when the flood comes, the flood will flow, in and up slightly, slowly, and the community can adapt, from time to time. We don't have the flood floods like other, mismanagement of the dam construction. That one is the water doesn't flow naturally. But in case of Yom River, when water flow naturally, people learn how to live with nature and water naturally as well. Then you will see the flooding, you see the level of flood trash here as well. And they do, fishing during the rainy season to supplement their income. They got a lot of fish, you see the fishery wicker work, right? The fishing equipment under the underneath their domestic space, and they do, they grow rice when the water came, and when the water gone, the river bank had been changed for cropping as well. You will see how they use that river bank, in various for their life. They don't need to go for shopping at Tesco, Lotus, or 7-Eleven or other shopping mall, because they learn how to live resilience with their nature and water. It's very impressive for me as well. And people serve that water, that's why, as it's just how like Thailand, many people recognize it's like a fluid society, that because we adapt to live with the nature well from generation. Flooding become, as you see from these photos, people celebrate and play with water, celebrate with water during the flooding season. And they generate income, from food stalkers, and they change the space into, the fun fair for children. Yeah, surprisingly. And you will see Still House is the showcase that we learn how to live with water. And also we see how people fishing, how people adapt their cultural landscape elements to live with it in harmony way. They do cropping, they adapt to live in the dry season and also in the wet season, the rainy season well. This is how resilient that they live. It's very impressive. And this photo show, actually, I have the water-based architectural design studio for architecture students to learn from communities. We have a workshop and workshop, I can say, because we walk a lot. We walk a lot to the community and to learn from community. And we try to combine, try to let our students learn outside the classroom. Our project will help the community. We are looking for the target areas, and we solve the problem through our design and present back to the community. You will see this is a sample of our community engagement through the wetland studio and water-based architecture studio, that students engage themselves to help the community. And also that design will be implemented and help the community leader to push planning into more practice. They adapt and adopt that, local housing character in affordable technology in order to help the poor. Actually, it's kind of the community live in the riverbank become not, I couldn't say poor because they're rich in culture and rich in nature, but it's working well. That is why it's another aspect of cultural heritage. Today, I just want to present another aspect, the way of locals living with water. even it's not, the World Heritage Site, but they present hundreds years ago of local wisdom to live with water. We need to empower the people with inclusive living. It's very important to learn. And also the case study that we learn, we will see how we share the good practice and lesson learned for affordable innovation, I can say, and also integrate the academic service with the researcher, with the community. I always concentrate on 4S for implementing the project and even the coursework, which is scholars, students, staff, and also with stakeholders. This is the way how we try to engage our university with the community. I'm not quite sure in Indonesia, but in Thailand, our lecturer have 4 main missions. First mission is teaching. The second mission is researching. The third one is to academic service. And the last one, we support the rural sector. That is very important for mission of the university, even regional university in Thailand. And interestingly, the locals employ water-based architecture and cultural landscape as the national tools which they can afford. And it's a resilience approach to reduce loss and risks from flooding. Interestingly, learning from local knowledge provides designers as well as planners with a soft strategy to cope with floods by using affordable approach. It's very important because a lot of good practice from the Western country too expensive for locals, like developing country, especially the community in rural areas, to be applied to their life. Yes, and this is my key message for today. As we know, is I just have raised a question here. Shall we resist the nature and its phenomena, or how might we learn to live with them? When we talk about our future challenge, we think global, but we need to make it happen at local as well. Thank you so much for your attention. And I need to say, is it, sorry for my pronunciation,
Yes.
Terima kasih banget.
Great, yes. Terima kasih.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Widya, from such an excellent presentation about flood and anything like that. Yes. So we need to coexist with the nature. That's what I remaining. And also maybe from the Professor Widya, this is the same with in Indonesia. We also have a Tridharma. It's about teaching, research, and also community service. So that's maybe the same with in Thailand also. So maybe we should go to the next presenter. We will have Bapak. We will have Dr. Prananda Nativas. Hello, Bapak Prananda. Yes, and our side. Hello. Yes, great. So for the Dr. Prananda Nativas, MSc, from the educational background, Dr. Prananda have a PhD from the Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia, and also have 2 master from the Master of Engineering from the Tongji University College of Architecture and Urban Planning from Shanghai, China, and also from the Bauhaus University, Weimar, Germany, and Bachelor Engineering from the Institute Technology School, November, Indonesia. From the professional experiences, until now, Dr. Prananda is a lecturer, Faculty of Civil Engineering and Planning at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. And also in the 27 Urban Planning and Design staff at LNK Associate of Architect and Planner, Beijing, China. And in the 29 Special Planning Consultant and the returning expert program at VUS, maybe from the Australia, right? And then 2016 from the 2019 will be sessional academic staff at Queensland University of Technology, Brisbane, Australia. And also the expertise from Dr. Prananda is about disaster risk management and urban planning. Maybe for the next presenter is about planning approach for disaster mitigation and resilience. Dr. Prananda can open the slide and the time is yours. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I hope
Great.
everyone can see my screen now. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the committee for organizing this event, and thank you Isa for the introduction. And good afternoon, Professor Pitung Napu. I'm here in my capacity as a staff or as faculty of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. More specifically, I am a member of the Urban Development and Design Laboratory and the ITS Center for Disaster Management and Climate Change, or PUSLIP and KPI for short. Yes, I would also like to restate what Bu Iska has mentioned to Professor Pitung Napu, that we have the same mission as teachers in Thailand. We have teaching responsibilities, we have research, and we do also have community engagement obligations. For today, there are 4 points that I'd like to share with you all. I'm just going to share some lessons that I learned as a former bushfire and natural hazard CRC associate student while I was studying in Australia. I'm not going to talk about a specific case study, but it's just an overall, this is like a summary of the discussions and the dialogues that I've had with various members of various practitioners in the disaster risk reduction and the disaster risk management sphere, so to say. I'll begin this session by discussing natural hazards and risk management as the backdrop for this session, and then I'll review some land use. I'll review land use planning approaches as an introduction to those who may not be familiar to it, and then I'll try to merge points 1 and 2 to discuss hazard and risk-informed land use planning, and finally present the challenges faced by risk-informed planners in disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction. And the following slides will provide an insight into global natural hazards and their impact across the world, and also in a smaller context, which is in the Indonesian context. But globally, natural disasters, this is an overview of global natural disasters up to 2019. And the world's major natural disasters affect upwards of 90 million people in 2019, of which about a third were affected by storms, another third by floods, and then by droughts, and then less than 2% affected by other types of disasters. And we can see that there are direct economic losses that are the direct economic losses. They're valued well over 100,000 or 100,000 or 121 point so and so billion US dollars were reported worldwide in 2019, of which almost half of it was caused by storms, and about 30% were caused by floods, and then followed by wildfires and earthquakes, and then less than 1% of it was caused by other types of disasters. Whereas occurrences in Indonesia, data from the Indonesian National Board for Disaster Management show that over 1,800 natural disaster events occurred across Indonesia between 2005 and 2015. So that's a 10-year span. More importantly, though, the trend is consistently going up, thus highlighting the importance of disaster risk reduction. Most recently, the Indonesian Bureau of Meteorology announced the results of their investigation on earthquakes and potential tsunamis off the coast of Java. And the modeling that they did, their model indicated that the southern coast of Java Island is potentially at risk of severe tsunamis. That sort of paints a pretty bleak or a pretty scary picture of what's to come. And generally speaking, some of you may already be familiar with this diagram or this cycle. The diagram of this cycle has some variances to it. There are diagrams that depict the disaster management cycle in 3 phases. There are those that depict the cycle in 4 phases. In this instance, I will use a 4-phase diagram. First is prevention, and then followed by preparation, response, and recovery. And during the prevention phase, prevention activities are conducted to reduce or eliminate the exposure and impact of a hazard. And prevention can be achieved by either minimizing or otherwise preventing exposure to hazard altogether, or by reducing the impact of the hazard through capacity building or reducing the vulnerability of at-risk elements and communities. And that bit there, capacity building and reducing the vulnerabilities, have been discussed in extent by Professor Pitung Napu earlier. And natural hazard mitigation also basically consists of actions taken to prevent or reduce the risk of life, property, social and economic activities, and even natural resources from natural hazards. Now, the obvious solution to reduce or prevent natural hazard exposure to people and assets is simply to avoid or otherwise restrict development in hazardous areas. However, in practice, it's very difficult to do so for reasons that I will demonstrate a little later. In preparation, then measures are taken to minimize the consequences of a disaster event or on a community and ensure a timely operational response and recovery. Activities conducted in the prevention and preparation phases are generally very complementary. And then when we go into the response, when we shift into the response phase of disaster management, this phase involves the conduct of all activities and appropriate measures necessary to respond to an event. Some of the key components in the response phase would be communications, supplies and equipment, and of course, emergency personnel. And there are common problems that are associated with the response phase or that plague the disaster response phase, but I won't go into that into detail. Finally, the last phase, which is recovery, this is the process of and taking appropriate measures to support affected individuals and communities in the reconstruction of the physical infrastructure, restoration of the economy and the environment, and the well-being of the population or the affected population. Recovery can be divided into immediate or short-term oriented recovery. They could be, they could also be oriented or geared more towards medium-term recovery, and then subsequently long-term recovery. This final phase, or the recovery phase, presents a crucial opportunity for stakeholders to develop capacities that reduce disaster risk in the short, medium, and long-term time frames. Sorry. Oh, yeah, actually, yeah. So for this session, I'm using Crichton's risk triangle approach to explain the mechanisms of risk. And Crichton sees risk as a function of hazard, the assets and people exposed to the hazard, for example, a geophysical phenomenon, the assets and people exposed to the hazard, and the vulnerability of what is exposed. And accordingly, the likelihood of harmful consequences can be altered if we alter any side of the triangle: hazard, exposure, or vulnerability. Exposure and vulnerability will generally be much more complex and perhaps even more difficult to define than hazard. So I believe that this concept may be useful in an analytical sense, and perhaps in this session, it can help explain the interplay of hazard, vulnerability, and exposure in the context of this lecture. But personally, I do believe that this concept or this approach has its limits. For example, where complex risks are concerned, such as from hazards emanating from socio-technical systems or hazards that have no clear spatial or temporal boundaries and no agreed solutions. I don't think this sort of approach can represent that. And attributes of socio-technical systems or socio-technical related hazards do make it very difficult for individuals, for groups, communities, and emergency managers to assess vulnerability and coping capacity. But for the purpose of this lecture today, I think this approach or this concept would suffice. There are, as you know, two approaches to minimizing or preventing exposure to natural hazards. There are structural approaches such as constructing dams, constructing levees, and retrofitting or adaptation of buildings to certain geophysical properties. The other approach is the non-structural approach, and that's what I will focus on today. Again, Professor Pitung Lapu mentioned earlier about local wisdom, and I think local wisdom is the best resource to tap into for adaptation strategies, especially since local wisdom is very, very contextualized, and it's a very, very good and a very, very valuable starting point, I reckon. And so, from my discipline, I guess one way to reduce the physical impacts of natural disasters is to adopt hazard mitigation practices like land use planning. Non-structural mitigation measures such as land use practices and building codes are needed to prevent or reduce actual damage from natural hazards. Such measures represent a major opportunity for immediate low-cost action to reduce the impact of natural hazards. On the one hand, land use practices reduce hazard vulnerability by avoiding construction in areas that are susceptible to hazard impact. It is argued that some government agencies can encourage the adoption of appropriate land use practices by establishing regulations that prevent development in hazardous locations. They can provide incentives that encourage development in safer locations, or simply informing landowners about the risks and benefits of development in locations throughout the community. These actions, however, are often perceived as restrictive, costly, and somewhat incompatible with the community's economic development goals. Therefore, mitigation may involve solutions that are technically sound, but sometimes politically unpopular. So I'm going to briefly review a couple of approaches to land use planning. It is a very broad approach, a very broad review to the various approaches to land use planning. But I believe that understanding the fundamentals of these approaches to planning is critical to understanding how land use planning can be used as a tool in mitigating disaster risk exposure. So broadly speaking, I categorize land use planning into two very broad approaches: prescriptive approach and performance-based approach. First one, the prescriptive approach specifies suitability through land use prescriptions such as zones, and it is administered using zoning maps and zoning texts. And a bit of a closer look at prescriptive approaches, and I am using the term prescriptive planning or prescriptive approach to describe a planning system that basically divides the territory of a municipality into functional districts or into zones. Other known terms are Euclidean zoning, conventional zoning, and traditional zoning. And this approach basically emerged as a planning response to the need for improving urban areas. And this prescriptive approach specifies land use suitability through land use prescriptions, such as zones. It was assumed that by limiting the mixing of land uses, it would improve living and working conditions. Zoning regulates development by creating hierarchical land use categories and specifying the intensity of development. And so the categories separate land into sections or zones in which similar uses are placed, while substantially different uses are placed in separate zones. The three land use categories are typically residential, commercial, and industrial. It's relatively easy to administer. By determining land use suitability in advance, any proposed development or land uses that do not comply are not permitted. And to provide a bit of flexibility, some variances are dealt with devices that are incorporated into zoning ordinances that typically address the shape and the bulk of the building. This approach is relatively static, but it presents a very tangible appearance for future development and thus providing a high degree of certainty. However, because zoning define permitted and prohibited uses in a zone, it can't possibly encompass all uses that may exist in the future. Zoning documents generally become more complex over time as new topics surface. They require more variances, and then devices incorporated into zoning ordinances to deal with variances and to increase flexibility may then become avenues for negotiation, and thus leading to discretionary decisions, creating unpredictable outcomes. Despite the help of additional devices or additional the variances, prescriptive planning is not flexible enough perhaps to adequately evolve with complex changes reshaping urban settlements. So despite its goal to function as an environmental tool seeking to regulate the impacts of, first of all, it started out as a way to seek to regulate the impacts of pollution by way of segregation. There are no effective mechanism for protecting users that meet at the boundaries, where the effects of such zoning are felt outside that community. And another critique to prescriptive approaches that the categorization and the separation of land uses, especially residential categories, carries with it also the potential to segregate people by class and even by race. But the other approach is the performance-based approach, which regulates developmental impact through measurable performance standards. Different to the prescriptive-based approach, then the performance-based may seem a bit more flexible. First of all, literary descriptions of performance-based planning vary considerably, and for the purpose of this session, I'm using the term performance-based planning to describe a variety of flexible planning regulations, which include overlay zoning, performance zoning, and effects-based planning. So performance-based planning, or PBP, is a form of land use planning that contrary to zoning, which takes a very cookie cutter approach. This sort of approach does not rely on land use prescriptions via zones or other methods that specify land use suitability. Instead, it regulates developmental impact through measurable performance standards. It is assumed that the impacts of land use are a function of land use intensity and that it is more effective to directly regulate undesirable developmental externalities. Numerous local governments in various countries have implemented PDP with varying degrees of success. Some of the advantages, or some of the noted advantages of PDP over prescriptive regulatory systems include a better environmental management and protection, improved procedural efficiency, and increased flexibility. On the other hand, it has been critiqued or criticized for its lack of certainty, namely in terms of tangible appearance of future development. And it has also been critiqued for its level of intricacy in its implementation, because determining performance standards require a great deal of technical capacity. So, moving on to putting those 2 points together. Preparation and prevention wise, land use suitability for development is, I got my notes mixed up. Well, point is that the desired outcome of hazard-informed and risk-informed land use planning is to determine land use suitability and ultimately reduce risk exposure. And in that sense, hazard information should be used to support decision making, especially on how development will manage any hazard threats that are identified. Hazard maps can help inform this step by predicting or identifying potential damage. And then spatial coverage is also fundamentally important to achieve effective emergency services. That could also be taken into consideration. And ideally, as I mentioned earlier, the most obvious strategy to deal with natural hazard is to simply avoid developing in hazardous sites in the first place. However, that is not possible due to numerous reasons, either politically, economically, or even practical reasons as well. This is a map of the southeast Queensland region, and this map provides an illustration of why we can't simply avoid developing in hazardous sites. Most of the local government administrations in southeast Queensland are situated in, or they have about 50 to 70% bushfire prone areas. Up further north, Noosa Shire and the Sunshine Coast, they have the highest bushfire prone areas. This section here, Toowoomba, happens to have the smallest bushfire prone area of only less than 1%. But the reason why this area, Toowoomba, is maybe because it is such a large local government administration, but only a very small portion of Toowoomba is part of the southeast Queensland region. However, if the Queensland government were to follow this hazard map and avoid development in bushfire-prone areas, then there won't be much space left for them to build, basically. And this is only considering one type of natural hazard impacting a region within a country. So if we take it one step further and consider a multi-hazard risk analysis of an entire country, then I would say that will paint a rather grim picture. This is the Indonesian multi-hazard risk map And what this map basically tells us is that most of Indonesia is natural hazard prone. I would say this map is the perfect example of why we can't simply avoid developing in hazardous sites. If we say that, okay, this site is too risky, we're going to avoid developing in it altogether, then judging from this map, the entire population of Indonesia should uproot and move away somewhere else that is safer. So that is not practical to do, as is mentioned earlier by Professor Pitung Lapu, that we have to adapt. So yes, Developing in a hazardous site does subject populations to the risk and possible consequences of a natural hazard. So, as I mentioned, ideally hazard information should support decision making, namely on how development will manage any identified hazard, thus minimizing vulnerability and exposure. Some of you may be familiar with the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And this is a global framework, I suppose, that is adopted and translated into more local contexts. The framework revolves around 4 key pillars. The first one is that disaster risk reduction should be based on an understanding of disaster risk in all its dimensions of vulnerability, capacity, exposure of persons and assets, hazard characteristics, and the environment. Second pillar is to strengthen disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, clear vision plans, competence, guidance, and coordination within and across sectors of risk governance, as well as participation of relevant stakeholders are needed here. The third pillar is to invest in disaster risk reduction for resilience. Public and private investment in DRR is a cost-effective mechanism to enhance the economic, social, health, and cultural resilience of persons, communities, countries, and their assets, as well as the environment. I think from the third pillar, the third pillar kind of represents or kind of explains why we do see a lot of international aid in a lot of natural disaster events or following natural disaster events. Fourth pillar is to enhance disaster preparedness for effective response and ultimately to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. All of this is then translated and adapted into in Indonesia, what is known as the Indonesian Framework for Disaster Management. And in relation to my topic, planning approaches, the Indonesian Framework for Disaster Management is actually integrated into the national development plans and to the national development programs. In this diagram, I hope it's quite visible, but the red boxes here, and here represent the disaster management plans, and you can see in this diagram how the DNPs or the disaster management plans interact with other planning documents, and how disaster management plans relate to other planning and development plans. In a way, the disaster management plans that we have in Indonesia feeds information into regional long-term and mid-term development programs, and also into action plans in a more regional and local sense. And if we have a closer look at the disaster management plans, then disaster management in Indonesia is then the disaster management plans in Indonesia is further broken down into national scale plans, technical plans, contingency plans, and even recovery plans to guide disaster risk management practices across the country. There are some other notable policies on disaster management practices in Indonesia. The Disaster Countermeasure Act 2007 acknowledges the importance of spatial planning for disaster risk reduction and management. And the Act goes as far as mentioning its role in disaster mitigation and spatial planning as a preventive measure by way of its mechanisms. And then we have the Disaster Management Master Plan that serves as a guiding policy for disaster management practices across the nation. And the policy focuses primarily on disaster management practices, but does not consider spatial planning as a prevention or management tool. In fact, the Disaster Management Plan 2020 doesn't really mention spatial planning at all. However, the subsequent acts and the national plans, they all acknowledge the potential use of spatial plans for disaster management. And these policies, or rather the policies surrounding the disaster risk management policies, can also potentially present challenges for the implementation of land use approaches to disaster risk reduction and resilience. And that brings me to the second to last section of this presentation. Now, there are three challenges associated with land use planning for disaster risk reduction and resilience. And the first of those challenges or setbacks would be the formal risk. Formal risk is any sort of risk that is created by formal planning and development systems. A little bit more on that later. And then we have residual risks, which are risks that are not mitigated by planning and development systems. And then we have future risks, or risks that are created by urban expansion, by governance and lifestyle, and sometimes even by emergency management actions. And of course, future risks of climate change. A little bit on the formal risk, a little bit deeper on the formal risk. And this is an example of formal risks associated with land use planning. In the case of Southeast Queensland, there are several conflicting policies actually. So on the one hand, some plans and policies attempt to curb urban sprawl. And this is talking about a region where more than 50 to 70% of the area is prone to bushfires. So one way they try to curb that is to prevent urban sprawl. Some plan documents like Next Generation Planning and Subtropical Design and SEQ mentions that they would like to promote a more compact urban form. At the same time, there are policies that encourage urban sprawl. The latest Southeast Queensland Regional Plan defined new urban footprints that are well inside the stark red areas. And then there's also the Queensland First Homeowners Grant that encourages, or rather facilitates, growth of and demand for fringe development, because you must be buying or building a new home, or buying a substantially renovated home to be eligible for the First Homeowners Grant. And then there are other federal government policies that incentivize the purchase of second homes. Well, so conflicting policies, that's one challenge, I would say. Meanwhile, back in Indonesia, I think although land use planning is acknowledged as a potential tool for disaster risk reduction, the National Action Plan for DRR notes that there is still room for improvement. For example, we still need to optimize riverbank or shoreline area management. We also have to think about how we plan settlements in volcanic areas, and then we need to also consider soil or ground movement maps. And we also at the same time need to accommodate for the high demand for human settlement and economic development, while at the same time we we are still pretty weak in the monitoring and evaluation mechanism for DRR-oriented spatial plannings, because most of our spatial plans are still geared towards economic development and such. A little bit of disclaimer before I end this presentation of mine is that planning is not an all-hazard approach for disaster risk reduction planning. There are several threats that can't be curbed through land use planning. So land use planning can't respond to threats or hazards such as terrorism, biohazard, COVID-19 is a good example, and large-scale financial frauds. Land use planning can't respond to that. And for me personally, I think the all-hazard approach to disaster planning is kind of flawed in the way that it suggests that different hazards share commonalities, and we all know that different hazards have very, very specific characteristics and such. So to sum it all up, I'd say minimizing or preventing exposure to hazards may be very, very difficult due to economic or political reasons, as I've demonstrated earlier. And I like to say that in urban or regional planning, we rarely get the opportunity to build on an empty canvas. And whether we choose to plan our cities or communities using a prescriptive or a performance-based approach, we do need to incorporate risk analysis into our planning framework, and vice versa. We need to continuously advocate for mainstreaming planning approaches to disaster risk reduction. Perhaps we can sort of introduce some sort of risk classification to aid decision-making, such as this. We can determine acceptable risks, tolerable risks, and intolerable risks to help us make development-related decisions. And finally, speaking of blank canvases, even if we do get to start over, such as the case with the 2004 Aceh tsunami and the Japan earthquake and tsunami more recently, I think post-disaster urban planning and risk mitigation measures can still cause secondary effects, such as exposure to new threats, urban fragmentation, and many, many other uncertainties. So I'd like to end my session by paraphrasing John Hanmer, who said that we are all mortal and vulnerability is something mortals are endowed with. We can do many things to reduce our vulnerability, and the more we do so, the more resilient we become in the face of most hazards. To use expressions that are gaining currency at the moment, the more we do to reduce our vulnerabilities, the greater our adaptive capacity. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prananda. Excellent presentation also about a lot of planning approach for disaster mitigation and resilience. And also, we will continue to the Q&A sessions. For these sessions, we have participants who already dropped the question in the link. And also, the participant also can raise hand, and we will open your mic if you have any questions to our special two excellent guys today. And the first, I will read from the question from the link. Is it from the Isa Tafrij from the Universitas Pembangunan Jaya, Architecture and Indonesia? This question to Professor Witya. Okay, and the question is about the phenomenon of a local adopting indigenous things to their dwelling happens in many areas in Indonesia too. And although this is a remarkable achievement of adaptability from the community, it is also signifies failure from the side of the government, particularly in providing safe and proper housing. The question is about how did the government of Thailand manage this issue, and what long-term prevention or mitigation have been done to ensure the people are no longer left to their own devices in time of major disasters. And and also it is have another question, and what kind of steps should the Indonesian government adopted from that one? So yes, Professor Widya.
Yes,
can
yes.
ask, yes.
Can you hear me? Yes.
Great.
Thank you for the long and so complicated
Great.
question. Yes, actually, we have a lot of trouble in terms of land use planning, especially in the water-based settlement, because as you see, the boundary of the community very various and change from time to time due to the seasonal change. From flooding during the rainy season, and also if you dry out the water from the riverbank, but the land tender still remain become the issue because they don't sell the land, they don't sell the property, they can't do that because they don't have the land tender. But in the current situation, we recognize about this issue about the sense of place, the sense of belongings. People have strongly tied with the water, with their village, even they don't have the license to live. But it's kind of the kinship system. As I mentioned, it's traditional settlement. It's very big different from the byproducts of the water-based quarter in in urban area like in Bangkok, because at that one it's not traditional. It's kind of the urbanization sprawl, and people just live temporary, build their house temporary to live along the canal network in the urban area, in the cityscape. But in terms of the traditional settlement, people live there for 200 years, 700 years, some of them, but they don't have land tender. But it's acceptable to live there. Some of them happy to live with the river. Some of them kind of the waterbed way of living change into the roadbed corridor. Many people just relocated to live on land because they have a problem with the parking space. They have the problem with the garage. They change their way of living from waterbed. People in waterbed settlements still use the canoes and the boat for traveling, especially during flooding, to travel in and around the community. But because of the urbanization and the westernization since 1950, people just change their mindset. They prefer to live away, far away from the river. That is, they create another problem of the relocation. Many of the relics village we can see in and around the country, but we cannot do much, I can say, for the conventional town planning. We just we appreciate how Westerners recognize, the land tenure, like the Netherlands, that allow people to live floating on the water. You know what I mean? Even the new modernization, even in the UK, they have the design sustainable drainage system, which is wherever they want to build a new project, they need to concern about the drainage system, and they allow community to respect to the context, the existing context. But I don't see any big move in my country to appreciate how people live traditionally. Because as I mentioned once about it's about how you recognize the way of living, especially in intangible way of living. Yeah, it's not well recognized, but we try to compromise between old and new combination. We try to learn from previous and also we try to be resilient with the future as well. And the mitigation approach, I can say, sadly, the water-based settlements is vulnerable place, but the government, I mean, even at the local government sector, they don't prioritize this kind of settlement in their plan, because as I mentioned that the lack of the land tenure, then most of them just use their own wisdom to survive against climate change, to survive against land use change, blah blah blah. It's still the big gap in terms of land use change. As we know, we in Thailand, many people said we planning is not our strategy, but management or planagement is our traditional approach. We don't do much about protect and prevent, but we willing to help each other amazingly, during disaster and after disaster, as Dr. Pranada mentioned about, after disaster as well. That's a great job that ASEAN people learn how to help each other, as our cultural of, Oriental society do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Prof. Vidya. It is maybe Ibu Isa already in here also. Are you great with the answer from the Professor Vidya?
Yes, thank you very much. That was a very insightful answer. I think in terms of disaster mitigation and disaster prevention, we have a very different way of managing it with because most of the references. I'm sorry for one.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Isa, you still mute?
Yeah. But we've got a very different condition. Like, for example, when I read a lot of the references that comes from more developed country in Europe, and when I lived for a short while in Europe, usually when they have a disaster, I think the people are a bit more clueless because the government have done such a good job in managing everything. So when it happens to them, they're not very proactive and they don't really know what to do in terms of disaster. But when it comes to countries like Thailand and Indonesia, especially Indonesia, I feel like we have such small trust on the government that we just sort of, we are very good in adapting and like be very creative in dealing with all of this disaster. So it's a very insightful presentation from Professor Vidya and Dr. Prananda. So thank you very much.
Okay, great. Okay, maybe we move to the next questions. We have maybe for both of the first speaker today, maybe from the Prof. Vidya and also Dr. Prananda can have answer these questions. This is from Arfil Putri from the ITS, from the Department of Physics. It is also a long story. This is about the Arctic and Africa. Maybe the areas are most likely to be heavily affected by climate change in the future. Africa is one of the continents most vulnerable to climate variability and change due to very existing stress and low adaptive capacity. The question is it possible to change the situation there as a precaution or reduce the impact of climate change so that it does not have a very bad impact on living there? So this is about another country, maybe. Yes, it is about Arctic and Africa in the future. This is very far from the Asian, but it's okay. Maybe from Professor Vidya and Dr. Prananda have answer or maybe some discussion about this one.
Yeah, please let Dr. Prananda.
Okay,
thank you.
The first, Dr. Prananda, maybe you have a answer or any discussion about this one.
Thank you very much for bringing up a very global issue.
Yeah, very
I
global.
think it is a very, very global issue. Unfortunately, for Africa, I can't really comment on that at all, as I have no experience. I have no experience with African case studies other than those that I have read in scientific resources, references, and such. However, in anticipating climate change and the adverse effects of climate change, I would say that African communities, much like Asian, especially Southeast Asian communities, have, in my opinion, have very what's that key word that I just put down? Have a very strong social capital and social and usually very and quite strong social networks. I think therein lies their strength, because in some developing in some cases in developing countries, not all, but some developing countries, their citizens, so to say, their citizens are sometimes left on autopilot mode, and they have to fend for themselves because of their government's own frictions and whatnot. For Antarctica, I would say climate change wise, we can expect the sea levels to rise in the foreseeable future. I don't know how long. I don't know exactly how much, by how much, but I would say the depiction in that end of days film, what's it called, The Day After Tomorrow, I think that would be pretty accurate, though it's very much dramatized. But I think sea level rise would ultimately inundate a lot of countries, archipelagos such as us. We'd better prepare to move out, of course, if that happens. But that's my take on the two global cases that have been forwarded to us. I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prananda, because this is a very global question. This is not about Indonesia or Thailand, but it is also about Africa, Arctic, or any other archipelago. And maybe from the Professor Widya, do you have any suggestion for these global questions also?
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and the strength of Africa continent in terms of we have some similarity with Southeast Asia or ASEAN, as we are the developing countries, but we are rich in nature, we are rich in culture, and we are rich in diversity. And this is the strength point of our continent. But many people compare they said too much water in our Asia will cause extreme drought in Africa. I'm not quite sure about the connected of our planet, because everything connected. But it's a challenge for Africa to focus more on actually, I can say research collaboration as well could be helped, because human resources, peopleware, I can say, are still a crucial element to let African scholars and to work on, because of not limited in natural resources, but the difficulty in carry on research to solve the problems that we need some support from the global funding source. This is my experience that I used to work with the African colleagues, that many developed world try to support the African anyway. I think in different aspects that they are underrepresented from Africa as well. I can share in another aspect of the creative city as I'm a focal point of Sukhothai heritage. We try to promote the heritage in intangible way, and the UNESCO launched the framework in 2014 to make the dry heritage site to be more lively in terms of creative city with different dimensions of creative ways. And Sukhothai is a creative city for craft and folk art. And the UNESCO tried to encourage many cities in Africa to get the, a new mechanism to help the city for achieving the sustainable development. And creative economy, creative city is one of the mechanism as well to use our, that Dr. Prananda mentioned about social capitals, about cultural capital, to make the profit, to make it commercialized, to maximize our identity in balancing with the economic growth. That will be another future opportunity for African friends as well.
Thank you so much, Professor Vidya, and also the answer from the Dr. Prananda before. And maybe there are another questions before. We still have a time. Is it correct, Mbak Samara?
Yes, we will still have until 5:25.
Okay, great. So maybe if any participant who have any questions, you can also raise hand, or we will unmute for this session. Maybe I will waiting. No, maybe we just
can I ask a question?
Dr. Fernanda, you wanna ask questions to me or to Professor? Really
No.
different. Yes.
No, I'd like to ask a question to my counterpart, Professor Pitung Napu.
Yeah, great.
You mentioned about the riverside settlement or waterfront settlements. You presented a case study on that. I'm just wondering how similar is it to how similar is the case study that you mentioned to the Tayo settlement in Tayo is in Hong Kong.
Did you mean Hong Kong or Taiwan? Or
was it Tayo?
Or Malaysia, I think.
No. Tayo, I think, is, if I remember correctly, my memory doesn't serve me very well, but if I remember correctly, it's in Hong Kong. No, actually, forget that. But in the sense that most riverside settlements anywhere in Asia is generally treated as you mentioned because of tenure status, because of land tenure, they're usually treated as slums. And most of the times they are subject to eviction. Sometimes when they get evicted, as in the case in Indonesia, they get evicted. They would wait a few months maybe, and then they would come back again. And then they would get evicted again, and that cycle goes on and on. And in your experience, is it a similar situation there, or is it better for the riverside settlements?
All right. In case of the Western, I share you with a good practice in the UK and most of the Dutch, the Netherlands, they develop the new housing project on water, and they have the land tenure because of the land use recognition is different system. They make that one because of they have the regulation to support. Like I mentioned, in the UK, they have the sub design. They concern about how to make the room and prepare the room from green infrastructure, the more you build, the more you provide the room for the river. That's the thing that they have, the amphibians structure. I mean, in the Netherlands, we call it aqua-texture. It's come from like the water-based architecture, but aqua-texture. And in case of Thailand, we have, I separated, divided in about 3 main. Actually, in Thailand, we got 4 categorized of the water-based architecture. The first one is the look like the boat. We call the houseboat. Yeah, that's it, temporary built. Right now, we got the relocation process since 1950 because of the road-based development, and the government recognized the diarrhea issue, the health issue of diarrhea of the raft house. Then if you see the old photograph of Bangkok or Ayutthaya in the past, you see a lot of amphibians raft house mooring at that period of time, but they no longer allow people to do that. But there's still a lot of floating architecture in the Netherlands, right? Right now, in my province, it used to be the popularity of the raft house living, but so far they maintain the existing with the housing number. People have the right to live in the raft along the Nan River. But right now, most of the residential raft change into the restaurant, the commercial raft, not for living. And there are only a few places that have raft house so far. And the second type of the water-based architecture in Thailand is the still house, as many of them still remain in, Kampong, Malaysia, Indonesia, and, Vietnam. Oh, Vietnam, not much. Yeah, mainly in Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand. We still live in a still house. At that one, it's just to learn how to live with water, to let it flow, to reduce the risk and damage of the property. And they don't have land tender, but they still have the house number. In case of the raft, no way to reproduce the raft. If the raft damaged, the government will let them go on. Even the new generation want to, they can maintain or repair only. But the structure is dramatic damage because of the fluctuation of the water is unpredictable, and it's a big trouble. Some people say it's some disciplines see it, it's beautiful. Some people see it as to create air pollution for the urban area. Yes. In the third type, you see a lot of adaptation of the locals. They try to more adapt their domestic space with the new urban way of living. People appreciate concrete house as the representation of your economic status. Then they mix wooden, they change their steel house into the concrete house, 1 story or 2 story, but no underneath space. But they have to take more risks because we don't have the land use regulation to control in the flood risk area. We don't have the design guideline to let them, if you have money, you just change your lifestyle, the look of your house. And sometimes people appreciate to live along the road rather than along the river, because they no longer take advantage from the river. Canals no longer used apart from disaster transport during flooding season, right? Yeah, and they cannot fishing. This big change happen not only in the river in Thailand but in our Mekong as well. Kong River have facing with the big impact along Laos, China, the dam construction makes our border change as well in terms of the ecology system. Then for the mainland, it happened in different ways. But in my lower northern region, we still have the traditional settlement because of the Yom River still, the flood in our area, move slowly like that. Slightly, slowly, smoothly, stay longer for 3 months. Not only 3 months, but 5 months. Can you imagine the housing that I show you? Because in that area it's like the wetland as well. People live there, but they don't have any development to support that area. Just let it be. That's why resilient approach might be only alternative to maintain their, legacy, their way of living, their cultural heritage. Because somehow we can. I think Hoi An is another good practice. You will see they're facing flooding, but tourists enjoy traveling during flooding season. But in safety, service, in a safe service.
Okay, great explanation. I think that Dr. Prananda is satisfied with that, right?
Oh, with regards to her comment on raft houses and stilt houses being eye pollution to some, I myself am at the crossroads of that because I've when I was involved in a project with a rural government somewhere in deep rural area of East Kalimantan, and the only way to access that place was by taking a boat through along the Mahakam River. And along that river, you see a lot of raft houses, and they provide services. So you see floating shops, you see floating restaurants and such. Restaurants in quote unquote, but the services that they provide, it makes sense because the river is a lifeline of the region, and it's the only way you can get goods into certain areas. They transport everything through the river, from heavy machinery to photocopy machines and such. So everything through the river. But sanitation is indeed an issue with raft houses and stilt houses. Another example of stilt houses I would say that still exists is in Brunei. I remember that I used to tour around the stilt houses, the stilt kampungs in Brunei when I was living there, and sanitation is an issue, but I think slowly but surely these settlements, these riverside settlements, either in the form of raft houses and stilt houses, are slowly coming to. I think they're slowly coming to an end as a sign of changing times, I would say. But thank you very much for your response, Professor Pitonapu.
It will be a
Pleasure.
very yes. It's also a pleasure. Also, both of you are very excellent in the float resilience, and also Dr. Branda talk about the planning approach for disaster. And maybe for the time, I would love to wrap out our discussion today. So from the both of our excellent speakers, Professor Witya and Dr. Prananda, we have a great conclusion together. I think we need to coexist with our nature. Maybe we need to coexist also with the next climate change agenda. And in biology, I'm just searched about a bird with the mitigation. But now I'm learn about how human need to be living and blah blah blah. And this is a very appreciated. And also we need to cultural heritage conservation must be really important. I think Professor Witya also mentioned is about conservation in cultural heritage. And also we need to engagement with our community, also with local community. We need to prepare our local community, and also in the urban area we need to cooperation together between maybe the local, between maybe the urban area of the society, and for the government, and maybe for the research academy. And this is really a big and global connection. We need to together to have a good, we need to have to minimize and reduce a lot of impact of the global warming and climate change and a lot of things. Thank you very much for Professor Witya and Dr. Prananda for such an excellent presentation. Thank you so much to come here. And I think the time I will give to the MC, Samara. And I do apologize first to maybe I have a lot of bad question or anything with this moderator. Thank you so much for me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
สวัสดีค่ะ
Yes, thank you very much for Ibu Iska for conducting this amazing session, and thank you very much to Professor Witya and Dr. Prananda for the excellent lecture today. Please give applause to our speakers and moderator by using the Zoom reaction feature. And furthermore, we would like to present a certificate awarding to our speakers and moderator today. The first one is the certificate presented for Associate Professor Witya Pitunang. Yes, thank you very much, Professor. And then the next one is the certificate presented for Dr. Prananda Navikas, MSc. Now, last but not least is the certificate presented for our moderator, Ibu Iska Desmawati, MSc. Once again, thank you very much to our speakers and moderator for your availability on today's guest lecture series. We believe that your lecture will be useful for all of the participants. And before we end our lecture today, we invite you all participants, as well as the honorable speaker and moderator, to take a group photo. To all participants, please open your camera. I think we will wait for several seconds until the participants open their camera. And as we have 2 slides here, so please keep your smile until we finish the photo session. Okay, since some of the participants are ready, so I think we can start the photo session. And I will count to 3. 1, 2, 3. And for the next slide, 1, 2, 3. Okay, now we have finished our group photo. And then for the participants, please fill the feedback form through the link bit.ly/feedbackgls that you can also see on the Zoom chat room. The deadline for filling the feedback form is 1 hour after we finish this session. And we want to remind you that the participants who will get the stamp for it and e-certificate is the participants who come on time, join this event until the end, and also fill the feedback form. Finally, we have reached the end of today's guest lecture series, and we sincerely apologize for any mistakes we may have made in presenting as Master of Ceremony and Committee. Thank you very much to our honorable speakers, moderator, and all participants for the attention and cooperation. And we will see you in the next guest lecture series, as we will have 3 sessions next week. 1 session in Tuesday, 8 June 2021, with the topic Introduction the Concept of Sustainable Industrial Revolution and Sustainable Public Transportation for Jakarta Metropolitan. That will be delivered by our speakers. And then another 2 parallel sessions on Wednesday, with the topic I'm sorry, I can't read it, but you can check our posters on our social media, so stay tuned and don't forget to register, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Prof. Vidya, Bapak Prananda.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, have a good evening. Bye.
Bye,
good
Prof. Terima kasih Bapak Prananda juga. Terima kasih Bu Desi, Bu Vivi semuanya. Mari.
Terima kasih izin meninggalkan ruangan.
Baik, terima kasih Bapak.
Monggo. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi.
Bu Vivi, Bu Desi, Mbak Samara, terima kasih. Mohon izin, Ge.
Terima kasih Bu.
Sama-sama, mari.
Okay, thank you for all of you guys. Thank you very much. Let me end this session in a 3, 2, 1. Thank you.